Hey folks, welcome to Unqualified, the fantasy football show that's been incidentally matching to bars since 2017.
Oh, yeah.
I'm your producer, Rob Diesendorf, here with Sean Brady and Scott Johnson, two fantasy football rivals that have been sabotaging each other for years. They decided to come together to help you win your league and make your friends look like idiots. How's it going, fellas?
Pretty good. What was that? How'd you say it?
What?
We've been incidentally wearing...
Incidentally matching our clothing at bars?
Oh, it didn't sound like you said our clothing. It sounded like
No, I didn't
else.
say our clothing. I know, I did say something else.
What'd you
It's
say?
never a good
said?
sign when you get out of the shower and you look into the hallway and Rob's wearing the exact same shirt that you're about to put on. Not fun.
That's
And
what
very
happened to
similar
us
to
in
mine.
Florida. We all didn't talk to each other on the way to Florida. Then we got there, and then we all went to get ready for a bar, and then we all come out of the bathroom, and we all have white shirts on. And we looked like the Three Stooges.
You got to
I
get
would
it
like
in
to
before
point
Labor
out-
Day. You got to
to
wear it
point-
while you can. That's the key.
I would
What's
like
the
to
rule
point
with
something
that?
out. Hold on. Can I point something out, please?
Sure.
You two had long sleeve button down white shirts with no patterns on it. I had a short sleeve button down, whatever you want to call it, with a pattern on it.
Yeah,
White
but
shirt.
when it's that dark, I mean, who's going to notice if it has a pattern or not? It's just the fact that we're
I
all
think a
wearing
lot of people
button-up
would.
white
And
shirts.
we
No,
all
it's
had the
just
sleeves rolled up.
embarrassing.
We both had our sleeves rolled up,
Yeah.
so it's almost
Yeah, but that's
pretty
different.
much the
Like,
same.
that's... No.
What now? What's the rule with Labor Day? Why is it that we can't wear white after Labor Day?
Oh, the fashion
I
police.
don't
that
know.
just seems-
Is that a thing?
The fashion
seems
police will
ridiculous.
lock you up.
I didn't know that.
They'll get you.
Fashion police can go to
Well, we got
hell.
it out of our system at the same time together.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm glad it's over.
me too. It was awkward.
All right, so what are we talking about today?
Today we're going to be talking about the NFC South in
Loaded.
particular. Loaded fantasy division. But we're going to be talking just the layout. Each team in that division, so the Atlanta Falcons, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Carolina Panthers, and the New Orleans Saints. We're going to be talking about each position, breaking each one down, giving you our tips and some stats on each guy, how we think they're going to do the upcoming year, how they did last year, and predict the future for you here in this division.
Draft season is upon us, people. Time to get your stuff together. I'm saying stuff because these two guys over here are trying to censor me and not let me be inappropriate on the microphone.
You're just
Yeah,
making
we
that
just
up.
don't want you to say touching butts. It's just weird.
There's nothing wrong with touching butts.
You could say get your asses into gear for draft season. That's fine. But we just want to keep it like PG to PG-13. Not like
What if I just say
Not like a weird
everything at once
PG-13.
right now?
like what?
Okay, quick warning to everyone in your cars, etc. If you have kids in the car, I mean, we mark this thing as explicit. You know what you're getting into, but you might want to turn the volume down or mute it if you don't like hearing curses, because it's about to be a whirlwind.
Like
That's so unnecessary. So
God.
unnecessary. Oh, jeez. That's it. I'm out. I'm out.
Yeah. Yep. No, we're not gonna. We'll cut that. All right, let's talk about the Atlanta Falcons. Had a great year last year. We're runner-ups in the Super Bowl. Lost to the Patriots. Complete dismantling at the end there. But it starts with Matt Ryan, who was the reigning MVP of the NFL last year.
This guy is a really, really good player, and I agree. I think he's had a fantastic year last year, obviously. I think he's a solid QB1 this year. He might be going a little higher than he should because there's definitely going to be a little bit of regression having lost Kyle Shanahan, their offensive coordinator. Of course, he went to the San Francisco 49ers to be their head coach. But there's still a nice blend of security and upside with Ryan.
Yeah, my concern with him is he had a historic year last year. So, obviously, MVP of the league. But before last year, coming into the year, he wasn't even being drafted. So he really came out of nowhere. The year before last, he had 21 touchdowns, 16 interceptions. So very, very pedestrian year. And then last year, he came out with 38 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. So insane stats compared to the year before. The only thing that's not sustainable is his yards per attempt. They were 9.3 last year, which is historically good. So that you need to expect that to go down. I think the touchdowns will be anywhere from 21 to 38, like a combo of those past 2 years. So I think he is a QB1, but I think he's getting drafted a little too early as well. I agree.
Yeah, but before we move on, just one thing I'd like to note, I don't take a ton of stock in preseason action, but having watched the 49ers a little bit, they look fantastic on offense, especially the first team. And I think that just goes to show how important Kyle Shanahan was for this team last year.
Yeah,
I think losing him, obviously Steve Sarkisian knows his stuff, but it's still a new regime and just a new scheme probably there. I know they're saying they're going to keep the offense the same, but there's no way they're running the exact same stuff that Shanahan would run.
Yeah.
We don't know if Sarkisian can call a game like Shanahan can. So Ryan, I think, is the biggest, is going to take the biggest step back out of the rest of the guys on this offense this year. I think the rest of the guys should be okay, which we'll get to soon. But I think Ryan, you should not expect him to do what he did last year. If you do, you're probably going to be disappointed.
Yeah, and this is a guy with 2 first names. What can you really expect?
Like
can you
Ricky
trust
Bobby.
him? I don't know.
Yeah, that's very true. It's a good point. One guy that doesn't have 2 first names is Devontae Freeman. I don't think those are 2 first names. Anyway, this guy was a stud last year, but he has Tevin Coleman as his backup. The backup to those 2 is Terran Ward. You don't have to worry about him. But Tevin Coleman had some sneaky value last year and really came on towards the last year compared to the year before. So where are you taking Devontae Freeman? How do you feel about the 2 of them this year?
Honestly, I love Devontae Freeman. I especially love him where he's going. He's going late in the first round, in the 8 to 12 range, for 12-team leagues or, early second round. I think that's insane value. This guy, if he got every single touch there, he would be right up there with Shady McCoy, even, up there with Zeke Elliott, a healthy Zeke, or a not suspended Zeke Elliott, and Le'Veon Bell, and David Johnson. This guy is absolutely phenomenal. He doesn't have any holes in his game. He's good in the red zone. He's good on third down. He can pass block, except in the Super Bowl, apparently. But this guy is really, really good. I feel great about him, taking him late in the first round. I'd almost rather have him there than have an earlier pick, to be honest with you. That's how much I like this guy.
Yeah, so he got an extension this offseason. I think it was 5 years for $40 million. So he was one of the highest paid running backs, so they clearly like what he does. Tevin Coleman, I just want to name some stats of Tevin Coleman last year. Well, I'll do 2 years ago and last year because I think it's important to see the progression. Yeah. 2 years ago, 2015, Tevin Coleman's rookie year, he had 87 rushes. Not that many, but still enough to vulture here and there. Only a couple of touchdowns, 1 touchdown actually. Last year, he had 118 rushes and 8 touchdowns. So that touchdown is... That number is not sustainable, but Tevin Coleman also caught it a lot. Now, Devontae Freeman in PPR leagues is a freak out of the backfield catching the ball. He had 73 catches 2 years ago, 54 last year, so he'll get you a ton in PPR leagues. But rushing-wise, he still had over 1,000 yards both years and 11 touchdowns, so he still has some value. I think right where he's getting drafted is perfect. I would like to have him there, too. End of first round.
Yeah, again, I've talked about Freeman already, and Coleman I actually really like too. I think obviously he's a touchdown regression candidate because he had 11 touchdowns, 8 rushing, 3 receiving last year. That will almost definitely go down. But what I like about both these guys so much is that they can coexist together. That's the biggest thing. These guys are both usable, and honestly, having Coleman there helps Freeman because it keeps him fresh, keeps him ready to go, and it keeps him from getting hurt. So I really like both these guys. I think Coleman is a guy that I would, kind of like Derrick Henry, I would target later in the draft, regardless of if I have Freeman or not. And if I do have Freeman, I want to get Coleman too, because, this backfield is one that you definitely want to invest in.
Yeah. All right, let's move to the wide receiver position. So we got Julio Jones. Everyone's heard that name probably. The next guy is Mohamed Sanu, which is they're basically their second wide receiver. And then Taylor Gabriel, who had some sneaky value last year. Kind of a deep threat guy, but Julio Jones is getting drafted pretty much in the top 5. I think that's about right, but he does have some injury concerns that kind of scare me. He's always had injury concerns.
Yeah, he's only played all 16 games in 2 of his seasons in the league. That's crazy. Obviously he's had some, serious injuries in the past, but this guy is an absolute yardage machine. And as I mentioned with Matt Ryan, I think Matt Ryan will take a step back as the offense does under Steve Sarkisian this year, who's no slouch. Don't get me wrong, but he's not Kyle Shanahan. I think they're going to have to lean on Julio Jones even more than they usually do. So I think he is a pretty safe bet to be right where he should be in the first round. I feel pretty good about him, in the middle of the first round, but again, the injury risk is hard to overlook. Sorry.
Yeah, and one bet, a couple knocks. Obviously, he's injury prone. 2 out of the 6 years he's played 16 games. He's only had double-digit touchdowns once in his career.
Yeah,
and that was in 2012. So other than that, he's had the last years after that 2. He only played 5 games, then 6, then 8, then 6. So he doesn't get that many touchdowns, and they're trying to make that a priority. But the thing I do like about his stats and where he's getting drafted, he's always had over 100 yards per game in the last 4 seasons. So that's really good to see. And I think they'll keep that going. His yards per catch are still 15 to 17 in that range. So should have a little statistical regression with Sarkisian, but still going to be good. In terms of Mohamed Sanu, I don't think he's getting drafted. I don't think he should, honestly. Taylor Gabriel might be worth a late round flyer in deeper leagues.
Yeah, I agree. I think Sanu is possibly usable in a PPR league, in a deep PPR league, and Gabriel is usable in a league that is not PPR and has big play bonuses. Other than that, I'm not super concerned about these guys eating into Julio Jones's work, and I'm pretty much staying away from them. I do like Gabriel as a player. He really does that Ted Ginn role where he opens up the offense for everybody else, so I really like him, but not so much as a consistent fantasy player.
Yeah. Now, tight end position, we have Austin Hooper, who was a 3rd-round pick out of Stanford last year. So we kind of know rookie tight ends historically have never really produced good fantasy seasons, except for like Vernon Davis in 2006. So you really shouldn't bank on rookie tight ends. So last year, no surprise there. He didn't really do that well. Only 19 catches, over 200 yards. This year has some sleeper value as the tight end 1 there on that team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really counting on this guy to be a huge part of the offense, but I wouldn't be surprised if this guy ended up with with 8 to 10 touchdowns just because of him being a function of this offense, really. So I think there's worse tight end 2 guys to pick up. I think he's someone that you should keep in mind if you're in a deep league and you don't want to pick a tight end early. But again, I would not get too excited and just say, oh my God, he's an Atlanta Falcon, let's pick him up. I'd still, wouldn't count on him as your tight end 1.
I love him. I mean, I kind of disagree with you there because I love him, and I don't love.
I'm not going to take him. He loves him.
He just loves him.
All right, fine. Well, I'm not going to take him.
I just love him.
I'm not going to take him just because he's a Falcon. But I forgot where I was going with that. You guys just derailed me. Anyway,
just love him.
He has top 10. Oh, here I was going to say he has top 10 potential. But if you look at like Tyler Eifert a couple of years ago on the Cincinnati Bengals. He came out of nowhere, too. He was a 1st-round pick, so more of a pedigree than Hooper, of course.
True.
But people weren't banking on him being a starter. And then if you took him in like the last round of your draft, Eifert that was, he had like 10 touchdowns that year. So Hooper could have that same value there as your second tight end. And I think it's definitely worth a late-round flyer, especially if you have like a Jack Doyle or Zach Ertz kind of guy, earlier in the draft.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'll add, this is a really good sign if you're thinking about taking Austin Hooper later in the draft. He actually led the Falcons in Super Bowl targets, so that Matt Ryan will look to him in a big situation. He's kind of emerged as that security blanket towards the end of last year, so that's a sign that he's trending in the right direction.
Yeah, and in terms of this team, I think who we just talked about, sleeper potential is Austin Hooper for all those reasons. I think the biggest bust potential where he's getting drafted is got to be Matt Ryan. He's not going to have 38 touchdowns again. He's not going to have yards per attempt of 9.3 again. Those are historic numbers. So he'll probably get around 30 touchdowns, which is where he's been his whole career. So compared to where he's getting drafted as like a top 4 quarterback, I think he'll be top 10, but towards the end. And then this team is still really good. I think they could be 11-5 or 12-4.
Yeah, I really like the sleeper and bust. I think I'll add in Tevin Coleman as a sleeper. I think people are going to take a look at the touchdown total and say, oh my God, this guy's going to be nowhere near as good as he was last year. I think he'll be as good, if not better this year. I think, there's more than enough room for 2 backs to coexist in a Steve Sarkisian offense. So I would not hesitate to take Coleman later in the draft. Matt Ryan, I agree, biggest bust potential here. Look, he's not going to put up NFL MVP numbers again. It's just not going to happen. I don't see that happening. So don't take him expecting that. And then I agree. I think 11-5, 12-4 is definitely spot on for this team. mainly because the defense is taking a major step forward. Vic Beasley is a really, really good player. So I think they're going to be right in the thick of it in the NFC.
All right, let's move on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, this year's Hard Knocks team. If you're not, but first of all, if you don't watch Hard Knocks, watch it. It's on HBO. It's an inside scoop of training camp with a certain team each year. This year, it's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are awesome. So much fun to watch. Guy that's a little over the top and like trying too hard, honestly, is Jameis Winston, their quarterback. He's like, you just got to do less, dude. He's just over the top with like the leadership. It's definitely fake, honestly. But anyway, fantasy wise, he's getting drafted pretty much as like a late quarterback 1, early quarterback 2. I think that's about right. I think he has top 10 potential.
Yeah, I think if everything breaks right for them this year, Jameis should be in the MVP discussion of the league. So, he's going to put up huge numbers. He's going to throw a ton of picks. So that's one negative, one knock on his game. But I don't mind him as my low-end QB1 or my high-end QB2. I don't mind that at all. This team's going to go as he goes. So you really hope that he's right this year.
Yeah, I think in the NFL history, he's one of the few quarterbacks to have over 4,000 yards passing in both his first 2 seasons. So he had 4,042 his first year, played all 16 games, and then 4,090. So pretty consistent there. Picks, he threw 15 and then 18 respectively. So obviously more touchdowns, but that's a ton of picks. And fumbles, he lost 2 his rookie year and lost 6 last year. So that's a ton. So he needs to shore that up for him to be a consistent starter. But it could be the third-year leap here with him. Rushing-wise, really quickly, he had 6 rushing touchdowns this rookie year and only 1 last year. So realistically, he'll probably be somewhere in the middle. Running back situation is a little more interesting. So Doug Martin is suspended for the first 3 games. He's the slated starter when he comes back. In his stead, Jacquizz Rodgers is going to be the starter, and then they also have Charles Sims, who's more of the pass-catching back there.
Oh, boy, what a mess this backfield is.
It's a mess.
First off, I actually really like Doug Martin as a player. It's just so weird that he's so up and down season to season. And I think the suspension really muddies the situation up. I think, the suspension helps you get him at a little bit of a discount this year, but you're still not crazy because you don't know which Doug Martin you're getting. So the other 2 guys, Jacquizz Rodgers, I don't mind in a PPR league. Charles Sims, I don't mind in a PPR league, but I'm not drafting them standard. And Martin, I'll probably take later in the draft because he's, coming at a discount. You're getting a starting caliber running back very late in the draft just because he's out the first 3 games. It's not like Zeke's suspension where he's out 6. So Doug Martin is a little bit of a post-hype sleeper almost, and someone that I would definitely look for. I was honestly worried about this backfield because of them drafting Jeremy McNichols. I thought he might be a really good rookie coming in, but this is the benefit of watching Hard Knocks. He doesn't look like he's ready to really take over any backfield, in my opinion. So take Martin. I wouldn't worry about the rest.
If you're taking Martin, my opinion is you need to take Jacquizz Rodgers. I wouldn't worry about Charles Sims. He's hasn't been healthy any year in his career except for 2 years ago, and he barely had any stats noteworthy. But honestly, I think you need to take Jacquizz Rodgers. Jacquizz Rodgers had over 500 yards rushing last year with a pretty good average, 4.3. Not too many catches, but he's going to be the guy there while Doug Martin's out. So if you do take Doug Martin, the only kind of bad thing about that is you might be getting starter quality, but you have to take Jacquizz Rodgers, who actually might take over that backfield. Dirk Cutter, their head coach, didn't really commit to Martin as a starter full term. So that's something to keep in mind. The wide receiver position, they have Mike Evans, who is an absolute stud. They just got Deshaun Jackson in the offseason, who is one of the best deep threats probably in NFL history. I don't know if that's too aggressive to say, but
no, you're spot on with that.
Yeah, and then Adam Humphries is the slot receiver there, who had a couple of good games last year too. But Mike Evans getting drafted in the first round, and he's a top 5 pick right now to me.
Yeah, he's a stud. Just watch him play. The guy is 6'5". You don't see that very often. He's like as big as a tight end and just a freak athlete. Ton of fun to watch. Great fantasy player. Target monster. There's nothing not to like about this guy.
Yeah, a couple. I'll throw a little monkey wrench in here. Last year, so here his stats over the last 3 years. First of all, he's had over 1,000 yards every single year he's been in the league, which is incredible. Same with Odell Beckham. That wide receiver class was stacked in 2014. So 2014, 1,051 yards, 12 touchdowns. awesome year as a rookie.
Yep.
2015, he played 15 games, so he missed one game, but he had 1,200 yards, 3 touchdowns. So big knock there on touchdowns. And part of that was Jameis Winston, his first year, kind of getting comfortable with the offense, rookie quarterback. So we could forgive him for that. But last year came back to where he should be, 1,300 yards, 12 touchdowns. So there is some, I guess, concern that his touchdowns, he hasn't been too consistent with his touchdowns, and he's kind of been up and down. But and the other concern with him is he was a target machine, and now they have Deshaun Jackson. So, some people are saying Jackson will help take the pressure off of him, but he's going to take some targets away from Mike Evans, who's very target dependent.
Yeah, I really like Jackson as a wide receiver 3, which is pretty much where he's getting drafted. This guy will win you or lose you your week. So don't get me wrong. Don't, start him every single week with your eyes closed. But if he can gain more of a rapport with Jameis, he's going to boom more often than he's going to, bust up your week. I think he's someone that you really have to have, as I mentioned in pods in the past, a nice appetite for risk, because this guy is absolutely lights out when he's on. If he gets a second cornerback that he can burn, it's going to be a long day for the team's playing against the Bucs this year.
Yeah, and throughout his career, I mean, he has 5 seasons. He's been in the league since 2008, so 8 or 9 years now. Out of those 8 or 9 seasons, I can't even do math, but he's had 5 seasons where he's had over 1,000 yards, which is amazing. He's never had double-digit touchdowns. He's not really a red zone threat, but he is a deep threat there. With Washington last year, he had 1,005 yards and 4 touchdowns. I think that's what he can get again. He could easily repeat that. He also is going to return a few punts here too this year, so maybe some value there for leagues that give you points for that. One quick thing: Adam Humphries had 600 yards last year as a slot guy. As long as Jameis is trending in the right direction, he can have some PPR value. Now, tight end is a little more interesting, though. They had Cameron Brate, who was a breakout player last year, and they drafted O.J. Howard in the first round of the NFL draft this year, who you love, out of Alabama. Yep. So they have 2 guys here that can really produce. But what are you making of this?
Obviously, these guys are both really good football players, or, we assume that O.J. Howard's going to come in and be a really good football player. I think they're really intriguing, but they really hurt each other's value, too. I think if they were on different teams, they'd both be solid tight end ones, but they're on the same team. So we really got to see how the situation shakes out before we endorse one of them. I think personally, O.J. Howard has a higher ceiling, but Brate is no slouch. This guy's a really good player too. So I think both will have some weeks where they, really help you out, but it's going to be tough to trust one of them while the other one is still healthy and playing. I would personally stay away from this situation until you get a little bit more of an idea of how the target share is going to, shake out.
Yeah, rookie tight ends have historically never done well, like I said earlier in the pod, and that's just true. I mean, you can look up stats on every single rookie tight end. It's pretty much only been Vernon Davis in 2006 that had a good rookie year, a serviceable fantasy year. Cameron Brate had over 600 yards last year, 8 touchdowns. What I can see this year is how his touchdowns go down a little bit, but yardage-wise, he's the guy here that needs to be dethroned. Like, O.J. Howard is not just going to take that job over right away. He's going to take a couple years to get into it. So I could see Cameron Brate being a low-end tight end 1 or a high-end tight end 2 and maybe a bye-week fill-in guy. O.J. Howard is getting drafted in way too many leagues. I think you could easily stay away from him. I don't think he'll have any fantasy value this year, honestly.
Ooh, that's a hot take.
Yeah, thanks. Now, biggest surprise, it's a tough one, honestly. I think it could be Deshaun Jackson because he's getting drafted pretty late, but he can get back to his Philadelphia Eagles and Washington Redskins days where he's getting over 1,000 yards sneakily. So I think that's well within his reach. And then biggest bust potential, honestly, it's probably O.J. Howard because he's getting drafted in way too many leagues and he shouldn't be drafted at all. Don't draft him. This team is going to be awesome. They were 9-7 last year and they just missed the playoffs. So I'm pulling for them to make the playoffs. I could see 11-5 here.
Ooh, wow.
Pushing the Falcons for first.
I think this team's really interesting, but I don't know if they'll be quite as good as you're saying. I think my biggest surprise is going to be Doug Martin. I think, this guy easily could come back in and be the guy that was a, rookie sensation and then, kind of had a nice resurgence 2 years ago. It's very possible that he comes back and is that guy and, vaults himself back into the running back 2 discussion. my biggest bust potential, it pains me to say it, but I think it's Mike Evans, just because he's going in the first round. If he has any sort of regression this year, like he did 2 years ago, scoring 3 touchdowns, that's not first round output for you. So I don't think it's definitely going to happen, but he's really the only guy that's getting drafted high enough to be a bust potentially. I think the rest of these guys are valued right where they should be, or even a little bit undervalued. So I still like Evans a lot, but there's a little bit of risk just because of that touchdown variance that you touched on. I think for record, I think this team's honestly, I think they're more of an 8-8, 9-7 team. I think the Panthers, who we're going to get to next, are going to be really good next year and this year, and I think that the Bucs might be the team that gets leapt over.
All right, let's talk about the Carolina Panthers, who had a really off year last year compared to the year before when they got to the Super Bowl. Cam Newton, big bounce back candidate this year. He also had a pretty bad year last year compared to the year before again. But where are you taking him this year?
I really like this guy this year. I think he's a big bounce back candidate. I think he's a low end QB1, which is where he's getting drafted. But we've seen this guy's ceiling, and it is the number 1 overall QB ceiling, honestly. This guy is a great red zone running back, and he's a quarterback at the same time. So I think take Cam. He's a little bit undervalued this year, and I think, as long as he starts the year healthy, which is a little bit of a question mark right now, you're in good shape with him as your QB1.
Yeah, I honestly, we kind of know like what he is as a passer. So let me just rattle off some numbers of the last couple of years. He's been in the league for 6 years now, which is crazy to think about. You hear his touchdown numbers from 2011 on in that order. So 21 touchdowns, 19, 24, 18, 35, 19. So he's been up and down every other year, basically. He's been in the teens every other year or in the 20s and 30s the other years. 2 years ago, he had 35 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 10 rushing touchdowns, which is crazy. That wasn't sustainable at all. Obviously, he had some regression last year, but realistically, it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle this year. I don't think he'll get as low as 19 touchdowns throwing it, but there are some injury concerns about him running so much. He only had 90 carries last year compared to 132 the year before, so he's not going to carry it that much, and especially after they drafted McCaffrey, I think you need to bump down his rushing numbers to around what he had last year, like 350 yards. So that's a knock on his game, and hopefully his completion percentage goes up. But realistically, he'll probably get like 25 touchdowns passing. So I think a QB1, like right in the middle, is right where he should get drafted. Guy that just mentioned, Christian McCaffrey out of Stanford, drafted in the first round. Is he their starter? Is Jonathan Stewart their starter? We don't really know, I guess.
I think if you go and you take a guy number 7 overall, I think it was in the NFL draft, I think you're planning on getting the ball into his hands. Oh, number 8. So there you go. I think, honestly, he looks fantastic so far from preseason and, just training camp action. I think I see him as a nice running back 2 option, in my opinion, and I think he gets an upgrade in PPR leagues too. I'm pretty excited about this guy this year. I think Stewart will definitely vulture touchdowns from him, but he's nowhere near what he used to be. So I really like McCaffrey. I think, get him while you can. He's going to be a fantasy stud in years to come.
Completely disagree, and I'll tell you why. Jonathan Stewart he only played 13 games. Sorry. Last year he only played 13 games, right? He's very injury prone. We know that. But he had 218 carries last year, and he also had 2 other guys, Fozzie Whitaker and Cameron Artis-Payne, who are not nearly the talent level as Christian McCaffrey. Yeah, they're bums, but they kind of did what Christian McCaffrey will do this year, just better. No, hear me out. They had the same amount of rushes that I think Christian McCaffrey will get. McCaffrey is not an in-between-the-tackles runner. He's a freak athlete. He's fat. He's blazing fast. But he's gonna have value in PPR leagues. I would say as a flex guy. Where he's getting drafted right now, like 30th overall, is insane to me because he's not even going to get the in-between-the-tackles rushes. It's going to be Jonathan Stewart, who had 242 carries 2 years ago, 218 carries last year, and is still there as the goal line back. He's going to get all the touchdowns and the in-between-the-tackles running. McCaffrey going that early doesn't make any sense to me. He should be getting drafted like 2 or 3 rounds later. PPR leagues, love him, though.
Ooh, I cannot disagree with you ananymore. I should have seen it coming, honestly, knowing that you would hate on the rookie running back. But this guy
rookie running backs, they never do well. I don't know what there is. There's no disputing that.
This guy's good enough to be a slot receiver without even being a running back, and he can do both. They're going to use him in both roles this year, so he's not going to come off the field. This guy is going to get a ton of touches. I think he's going to get more in between the tackles looks than you think he will, and I really like him this year. If he's my fourth best player or fifth best player, I feel really, really good about my team. I think he's definitely due for a good rookie year.
And I take back what I said about rookie running backs never doing well. It's very rare that they do well. So last year, like, there were two good rookie running backs, but like they typically do not get 1,000 yards rushing. So take him if you want, but know the risk of rookie running back. Wide receiver Kelvin Benjamin had a pretty off year last year as well. So he came into the league in 2014, had 1,000 yards as a rookie, hurt all 2015. 2016, we were all expecting a bounce back year, but he only had 941 yards, 7 touchdowns, and a lot of that came in the first couple of weeks. So he really fell off the cliff there. And I don't really know what to expect of his value this year, but I think it's around 900 yards and 6 touchdowns.
I think he's an elite red zone option, and I think his touchdown total can easily skyrocket, but I don't see him really cracking, the 1,300 yard mark ever in his career, just based on the kind of player he is. He's a really nice flex guy, maybe a low-end wide receiver too, with obviously that touchdown upside, because, outside of Greg Olsen and hopefully McCaffrey, I think he's definitely Cam's favorite receiver. So I think there's definitely, a nice floor here, but the ceiling, it may not be as high as people thought it was when he came out of the league.
And really quick, what we mean by floor is like the minimum projections we think he'll get.
Yeah.
And the ceiling is like the maximum projections we think he'll get. So that's what we mean by those two things.
Yeah.
If people didn't know. The other wide receiver there is Devin Funchess, who was a second-round pick in 2015, so kind of high pedigree coming out of Michigan. I think he was a tight end in Michigan and then converted to wide receiver. 400 to 400 yards both years. Not too much to look at here, especially with McCaffrey coming into the fold. One thing to mention, Curtis Samuel was drafted in the second round by the Carolina Panthers this year in the NFL draft, is like third on the depth chart of the second wide receiver position. So he's like their fifth best wide receiver right now. So don't draft Curtis Samuel as of now.
I will add before you go forward, I really like Curtis Samuel. I think he's kind of the opposite of what McCaffrey is, where he's a wide receiver that can also take the ball out of the backfield, kind of like Randall Cobb in Green Bay. I think Curtis Samuel long-term and probably later this year will eventually start getting some touches just based on his positional flexibility. I think he's a really intriguing player, someone you don't need to draft, but definitely keep an eye on him because this guy can play.
It's going to happen in 5 years. He's like fifth on the depth chart. He's barely going to make the team right now. But
okay, so
ahead.
You're worried about Brenton Burson?
I'm worried about him being fifth on the depth chart behind Brenton Burson right now, which is insane to me. He was a second-round pick, yeah. So I am worried about him, yeah.
Okay.
About that guy. Yeah, we'll go with that. Greg Olsen, one guy I'm not really worried about, Greg Olsen, is getting kind of up there in age, their tight end. Been in the league since 2007. He was a Chicago Bear and then Carolina Panther for most of his career. Has had over 1,000 yards the last 3 years, which is insane for a tight end. You have to think the streak is going to end sometime, and it might be this upcoming year, but Cam still looks for him in the red zone in the middle of the field a lot.
Yeah, I love this guy. Solid tight end one. You don't need to overthink it. If you see this guy in the 5th, 6th, or 7th round and he's on the board, take him. Don't worry about your tight end position for the rest of the year.
Yeah. One guy to mention, if that does happen, that Greg Olsen kind of falls off the cliff there and doesn't get 1,000 yards or gets hurt for whatever reason, Ed Dixon is their backup, who had some value as a Baltimore Raven when he was on their team. He's been in Carolina for the past couple of years and could be a serviceable backup there, but name to mention there. In terms of this team's biggest surprise and bust and then overview, biggest surprise I think could be Cam Newton because he's not really getting drafted as a high-end QB1, and I think he could definitely get back to those waves. Not as good as 2 years ago with 35 touchdowns passing and 10 touchdowns rushing, but somewhere like, under that, but pretty close. Biggest bust potential is Christian McCaffrey, just because I'm not even going to say it again. This team is looking like an 8-8 team. Like the defense might get better, but they're still not to the ways that they were when they got to the Super Bowl.
Wow. All right. First off, I think my biggest surprise is going to be Cam Newton. I agree. I think this guy's getting definitely overlooked right now. take him. He's going to bounce back. He's going to give you a nice rushing upside. Even if he's not going to run as much as he did earlier in his career, he's still going to give you that nice upside with his legs. So I think I really like him this year. My biggest bust potential is actually Kelvin Benjamin. I think this guy, I don't know if he's ready to play this year. He's looked decent in the couple preseason games that we've seen, but there's reports that he came into camp way out of shape. So I'm not really excited about him as my wide receiver 2, which is kind of where he's being drafted. I think I disagree with you, though. I think this team made a lot of really good changes in the offseason, and I think they're going to be right back to being a playoff team this year. I think they're going to be a nice 10-6 or 11-5.
All right, let's move on to our last team. This is our last team in the last division episode.
Finally made it.
The New Orleans Saints. Yeah. Quarterback Drew Brees is an incredible talent at the position. Definitely a Hall of Fame quarterback. And this year he's getting drafted kind of within the top 5 of quarterbacks, and I love that. I love Drew Brees, honestly, this year. Since he's been in New Orleans since 2006, he has never had under 4,300 yards passing. Never since in 10 years has he had lower than that, which is crazy.
Yeah, this guy's one of my all-time favorite NFL players. He's gone a little bit too early for me, but I still feel good about him as my QB1. If you're worried about his age, like I am, take a lower-end quarterback 2 just to back him up. This guy is lights out. Playing under Sean Payton is phenomenal for him, and it's just going to be more of the same this year.
Yeah, so take a Marcus Mariota type or something like that, or even
exactly.
Yeah, I like that. One quick other stat. So he's also never had less than 28 touchdowns since 2007. He's always had 28 touchdowns or more passing, which is, again, crazy. He's always putting up yards. Running back situation is a little different. Mark Ingram is the slated starter, but they drafted Alvin Kamara and also picked up Adrian Peterson, another Hall of Famer, on the offseason.
This is a tough situation to judge. Obviously, Mark Ingram had a bit of a weird season last year. He kind of got himself benched in the middle of the year, but he still ended up in the top 20 running backs. But he had 1,000 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns. He had 300 more receiving yards with 4 receiving touchdowns. So that's a really nice season for Mark Ingram last year. I don't see him reaching those numbers this year with Peterson and Alvin Kamara sharing a backfield with him.
Yeah, I think Kamara is more of a pass catching back there.
Yeah.
He'll be just a backup guy, so don't worry about him at all. If you do draft Mark Ingram, I think you have to consider taking Adrian Peterson just because they're kind of going to vulture from each other, right? Mark Ingram, again, over 1,000 yards for the first time in his career last year. He might be more talented at this point in his career than Adrian Peterson is because Peterson is 32 years old now and he's been hurt. He's missed. Jeez, how many games has he missed? Since 2013, he's only played a full season once, and 2 of those seasons he's played in 1 and 3 games respectively. So getting old, not really producing even when he's out there. I think a lot of people are expecting a bounce back, but they're going to do a committee rushing here, which Peyton has said. So these guys are all going to kind of take away from each other. I think you need to consider maybe not taking Mark Ingram or Adrian Peterson at all.
Yeah, I think the plus side of that is that sharing the backfield will help both of them stay on the field, hopefully. So that's one kind of silver lining to that situation. I think it's easy to look at Peterson's numbers before he got hurt last year. Obviously, it's a very small sample size, but 1.9 yards per carry does not instill confidence in, I don't think, any fantasy player. But the Vikings line is really not good. I think the Saints are a little bit underrated as far as a run blocking line. I definitely think Peterson will have some value this year. I just don't know why the Saints went and got him and then drafted Alvin Kamara. It's really puzzling to me. Maybe they don't like Ingram at all, which it remains to be seen. But it's a very muddy situation, and I agree. I think I'm going to stay away from it. To be honest with you, I really like Kamara as a deep sleeper. I think if Ingram or Peterson gets hurt, Kamara has some real value right away.
Yeah. Let's talk about the wide receiver position. So they, bit of a weird offseason. They lost Brandon Cooks to the New England Patriots and picked up Ted Ginn to replace him, which isn't really a replacement at all. But they have Michael Thomas, who's a stud last year as a rookie. He's a 6'3" guy, 212 pounds. He added some muscle to his frame, so he's going to be like a prototypical wide receiver 1. But last year as a rookie, 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns, and it's only going to go up from there. He doesn't have Brandon Cooks to compete with, but he does have Ted Ginn's help in kind of taking the top off of defenses. Willie Snead is a pretty good PPR target here, points per reception guy in the slot. He had 800, almost 900 yards both years and 3 to 4 touchdowns each year.
Yeah, I think when you judge this receiving core, it's really important to look at Cooks' numbers and see what they're losing. So last year, Cooks had 78 receptions for 1,173 yards, 8 touchdowns. Year before that, he had 84 receptions for almost identically 1,138 yards and 9 touchdowns. So you're pretty much, that's a consistent, production from Cooks. You're basically losing 80 catches, 1,100 yards, and 8 touchdowns. That's a lot of value to be spread out throughout this receiving core. I think Michael Thomas definitely sees an uptick, but I think Willie Snead also sees a huge uptick this year. I think both of these guys are going to be very, very good. I think Thomas is a bona fide wide receiver 1, and I think Willie Snead could crack the wide receiver 2 discussion. I think he's a really nice flex play this year.
Yeah, and you have to think like Drew Brees is still going to have those numbers that he always puts up, right? He's always had a different cast with him, so he's going to put up those numbers. So those Brandon Cooks targets and catches, they're really going to go somewhere. And Ted Ginn is not, he's not going to take them all. He had his second best receiving career year last year in his career with 752 yards. We know what he's like. He's just a deep threat. That's it. He's not going to take a lot of yards away from Snead, who I think will have a bump. I think Snead will get over 1,000 yards, probably 6 touchdowns. And then Michael Thomas, I think, could be a top 5 wide receiver at the end of the year with, I could see him getting like 1,400 yards, honestly, and double-digit touchdowns. I think he's a stud.
Completely agree.
Tight end position, Coby Fleener, who was a complete bust last year in his first year with the Saints. They also have Josh Hill, who had some like sneaky value, kind of like taken away from Fleener when you didn't really need to. But Fleener last year, 631 yards, which is not what we were expecting, and also 3 touchdowns. So I think he could do better than that, but still some dropping. He had some issues with drops and not the most talented tight end.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of hype with him coming over from Indianapolis 2 years ago because, he was honestly Andrew Luck's favorite red zone target for, a good portion of time. Drew Brees did not have the same rapport with him last year, but again, he's been there for, over a year now, so maybe it's a little bit different. So Fleener's a guy that if you really want to pass up on tight end throughout the whole draft, he's a guy that you feel all right taking just because he plays in a great offense. So you're really drafting the role as opposed to the player. I really like Josh Hill. I think if Fleener wasn't there, Josh Hill would be a guy that I kind of view in the Jack Doyle mold where he's kind of an emergent talent, but also in a really good situation. However, both these guys being there, I don't love either of them as my starter. Fleener, maybe if you, decide to ignore the tight end position in your draft.
Yeah, and you look at Fleener, he has the pedigree. He came from Stanford playing with Andrew Luck in college. He was a second-round pick, almost a first-round pick. So clearly, like the talent and pedigree is there. He just has to put it all together. He did 1 year in Indianapolis. I could see him getting more than 631 yards because, again, Brandon Cooks is gone. So maybe Fleener takes a lot of those touchdowns in the red zone and more catches and yards. So I got to be on the lookout for like a post-hype sleeper guy. I think I would love to take a flyer on him as my second tight end. And that does it for the same. Oh, the busts and surprises. I think surprises could be just like for that reason. Coby Fleener. I think the biggest bust potential is probably Mark Ingram because he's getting drafted as a starter, like a running back 2. And you got Peterson, you got Kamara, and it's going to be a committee there. So probably won't get 1,000 yards. This team, I don't know. I could see them being like 7-9, like not that good, middling.
Yeah, I agree. I really like Mark Ingram as your bust pick because I agree. I think I wouldn't be surprised if Peterson ends the year as their number 1 running back, and I also wouldn't be surprised, as I mentioned before, if Kamara emerges as this just lights out receiving back. I think I like Peterson and Kamara a lot more than I like Ingram, especially for the price. But still, I gotta go with Willie Snead as my sleeper. This guy is a really, really good player. He was just kind of, a victim of being the 3rd wide receiver on the depth chart last year. He had a couple games where he was absolutely phenomenal. I think you'll see more of that this year. I think he's a really, really big breakout player this year. As far as the record goes, I kind of agree with you. I think their defense is not nearly enough to get them to 10 wins. I think they're like a 7-9, 8-8 team, but they're definitely going to make some noise, probably ruining some seasons for some other teams because their offense is that good.
Okay, so that wraps it up for our NFC South pod. Once again, we want to thank everyone for listening. We really appreciate all the feedback. And if you guys can leave us a review or rating on iTunes, that would really help the show. Every single rating helps us ranking. Our ranking in iTunes go. I'm gonna start that over.
All right. Whew.
Okay, so that wraps it up for the NFC South pod. This is our final pod before the season starts. I want to wish everyone good luck, and we want to ask you guys if you can leave us a review on iTunes. It really helps the show, helps us get a better ranking with every single review. So beyond that, follow us at UnqualifiedFF on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you guys have any urgent drafting questions, send us a message right away. We're going to get back to you ASAP. We're going to be all over the social media as this thing gets going.
Yeah, and just to look forward to during the season what we're going to do. So obviously the preseason stuff is done. All the division pods are done now. Moving forward for this season, we're going to release one episode per week. And basically the breakdown is going to be, we're going to recap the previous week, how we think guys did, who went, performed up to their expectations, who did not. Then we're going to talk about free agency. So guys that we're on the lookout for the upcoming week. We're going to release this pod on Tuesday, so you guys have the guys ready to go by Tuesday night when waivers are going through. And then we're going to do a preview for the next week. So that's kind of the breakdown during the season. One per week, release on Tuesday.
Yeah, I think one really important thing to kind of dive into more of what Scott just mentioned is we're going to do the work for you as far as looking forward to the week ahead. You can just listen to what we're going to say, matchups that we particularly like, as opposed to, just a straight up ranking every week. We'll talk about guys that are notable for one reason or another, and we'll do the work for you, as I mentioned before. We'll look ahead before you even need to. So we'll be, here for you as your resource every week.
Oh, big gulps, huh?
Big gulps.
See you later.